Hello, everyone. My name is Shauna Smith, and I'm a board member for Sculpture Walk Springfield, and I serve on their Education and Outreach Committee. Today, I have the immense pleasure of speaking with Sarah Stracke. Sarah is an artist, a designer, she's an educator, a florist, and a business owner. She also happens to be one of my very best friends. Sarah is the artist of Mind Body, a sculpture that's currently on view for Sculpture Walk Springfield. It's located outside of Mother's Brewing Company. And today we're going to be speaking with her about that sculpture, among many, many other things. Sarah is the most driven person I know. She's passionate, she's very hardworking, and she's the biggest dreamer I know. So please stay tuned. I guarantee you're going to feel very inspired by the end of this conversation. Sarah, thank you for joining me today and being generous with your time and sending such beautiful photographs our way. How is it that you're doing?
I'm doing so good. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I'm honored to be interviewed by you. This is an experience I'm looking forward to. I'm doing really well today. I'm like in the middle of a transition from basically working elsewhere to now working from home. I officially have home internet, which is huge because I live in a rural area. So I'm just kind of settling into that, working from home space and finding out what my feng shui is here. I live in a renovated milk barn on the north side of town. So it's a sanctuary for sure, but that can also be distracting.
Oh, well, thank you for tuning in from a space that feels so safe to you. So you did mention where you live. You're local here to Springfield, Missouri, and we'll talk a little bit more about that and all the different ways that you think through working locally. Is there some other ways you'd like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah. So like Shauna said, I'm from Springfield, born and raised. Been here my whole life. I've done quite a bit of traveling to inspire my work, to inspire my life. But this is my home base, Springfield, and I love it here. And I probably won't be leaving, at least for any lifetime pursuit of my own. So I am a native here. That definitely inspires my work. I also work as a florist. Shauna mentioned that I'm a business owner. I just launched my own floral business this year called Locust. So I'm coming into, I guess it's official like second year as far as 2021 goes, but this will probably be like about my 6 months as operating as a business owner. So I'm starting to get the hang of it. Um, and I also work freelance as well for Phoenix Marble on a creative magazine that they're anticipating launching in the new year as well. So I do a little bit of creative direction and a little bit of consulting as far as that goes. But my focus is floristry primarily, and then my art practice in relation to that.
You are a jack of all trades. You have everything going on, and I cannot wait to talk more about all of those different things you mentioned today. To start off our conversation, we're going to hop back about a year. In 2019, Sarah created Mind Body, which is currently on view for us here. So we're going to start our conversation today, taking her back to this sculpture and hearing an update about what this sculpture is and what it means to you here in 2021. So can you share with us a little bit about Mind Body?
Yeah. So Mind Body was created, just to give you guys a little bit of context. During my very last semester in my undergraduate, which I was teaching at a middle school, finishing my art education bachelor's degree, and doing a lot of reflecting during this time. I wasn't taking any studio classes, so there was a lot of desire to get my hands dirty and make something. And I was working with a very talented teacher in the area, Chris Mostyn, who is very dedicated to his personal art practice. So through, I think, his guidance as well as guidance from my friends and guidance from the book The Artist's Way, I think we were all pretty inspired by journaling or sketching daily. So this was a time where I was sketching daily, and I was using my most familiar way. That's the sketch there for Mind Body. my most familiar and comfortable and exciting way to create work, which is to take something that I see in the world or that I recognize as a representational object and then abstract it a little bit. Um, and I think for me, that allows a little bit more space for interpretation and feeling and a lot of those abstract thoughts, which are usually feelings. So for me, I was thinking a lot about specifically the mind body connection and basically our mental activity in relation to our physical selves. And I think that had a lot to do with the phase of life I was in, kind of getting ready to launch into my own space, a lot of self doubt, but a lot of bravery. And I think that initially, when I drew this drawing in my sketchbook, I was thinking about my body almost as a burden of what I felt like metaphysically and mentally I was capable of doing. I actually felt a lot of confidence mentally, but less confidence physically. But then as I investigated that, I started to find so much strength in my figure and in my body, and how that related to the strength of my mental space as well. And so I started trying to figure out, like, how would I draw that, and how can I show the like curves of my body that might mean something to me or mean something to other people. A lot of times the female figure is objectified, and I think I was kind of playing on that a little bit and accentuating the curves of this humanoid form, which this is essentially, I guess, a self-portrait in a way. um, but I just kept exploring that. The three tiers of the arms are kind of represent at this phase of my developmental stages, for this art piece, was representing mind, body, and spirit. And I just felt this like holistic sense of self, and I was just doing a lot of reflection. So that's kind of where the sketch came into conception. But then as I worked with the piece and made it and chose officially the material, and then I think through choosing materials and working with the materials, um, the sculpture starts to change as well, and that is due to changes in conception, but also challenges with material. And then at this point, I think that, so it took me several months to make this piece. It was the first time I had used concrete to make a form. It was the first time I had worked larger than like 2 by 2 feet, pretty much, maybe 3 by 2 feet. And Sculpture Walk prefers larger sculptures at this time. They were expressing that. And so I had thought, I'm going to be ambitious and do this. So it's a larger than life size figure, which I think actually really attributes to the way it feels when you approach it. Her body, you can really feel the weight, and that's in part because of the shape and in part because of the scale. But yeah, working with concrete was a challenge. It was incredible. It's a little bit like really sludgy, slurry ceramic material, which was cool. And I built up this armature. My husband helped me with welding. He was working with Mike Stelzer, the sculpture artist in town. And so we kind of used a little bit of that facility to create the initial frame of the sculpture. And then on top of that, I wrapped chicken wire to make the armature. And then on top of that, laid the wet concrete, which dried in phases. And then I just kept building it up, which is something that also I usually work subtractively. And I was used to, at this point and up to this point, working in wood, which I love wood so much for many reasons. But for something at this scale, and also that needed to kind of weather a year or two of weather, I needed to make something that was a little hardier and was less apt to crack or fall apart in that way. And I still got to use wood in the end, which is kind of I feel like a major part of my language as an artist. So then this is the finished piece. I applied stain to create the brown color. and then the 3 wood forms versus the 1 egg shape, reinstating the 3 mind, body, and spirit, but also in reflection of another few layers of how I started to think about this piece. At the time, and still today, I'm very inspired by Barbara Hepworth and Louise Bourgeois, 2 artists that really inform me as a female artist making, especially in an abstract sense. Both of those female artists reflect a lot on their maternal experience and their feminine experience, others' maternal experience, or how they think about being a mother, or other friends as mother. You may have seen Louise Bourgeois' Maman spider at Crystal Bridges, which means mother. And it's she, when I researched that piece, was referring to one of her friends that was a motherly figure in her life. But something that I see in relation to that work and this work is kind of its, what's the right word? The spider is so scary and actually pretty off-putting. And in the same way, this figure ends up being this large, bulky, kind of grizzly bear figure that isn't inherently beautiful when you look at her until you start really like thinking about maybe what she represents, or how her form is actually very nice and curvaceous and soft. And maybe, you start to relate your experience to it, maybe in a motherly way, maybe in a grizzly bear way. And I loved the fact that this sculpture had its arms up and in this kind of gesture of like protecting its babies being its eggs that were in the seat there of its kind of cradle head. So as I started making this, I started thinking about, why do I have this idea about my body image? Where did I get it? And usually you start tracing that back to how you were raised, who your mother was, what she was saying to you, what experiences you might have come across as a kid. I have 2 siblings, so the 3 eggs started representing my family, but also the body started representing my mother. And so there was this, reinterpretation as I began to work and began to become intimate with the forms I was working with, which made me investigate myself further, but this piece further, its abstraction further, which is, again, the beautiful part of abstraction, is that it can take on so many different meanings. And so, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the traveling through, conception to end piece, with this piece that's at Sculpture Walk of Springfield in the Mother's Brewery Yard. Is there anything that I missed, Shauna, that I should include in that?
I think that was a great overview. And I was around when you were working on it, and I remember it having the one sphere, or it's kind of like an oblong sphere that's
Yes.
drawn here. And I
Yes.
guess I don't think I remember being like, oh, now there's 3. I'm sure we've talked about it. I do love the connection with Maman, because the eggs and how many of Mamans have the like egg sac in them, and so there's another visual connection. And I know that this piece was just a really big feat for you. Like you mentioned, you're used to working on a smaller scale. You worked with brand new materials. And I remember you putting in 10-hour days, and your hands would just be like torn apart because of the materials you were working with. So it's great to hear you reflect on it now, that you made it, it's possible, that you can do anything. Yeah, that was a great reflection, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I would love to share with folks some of that smaller scale or subtractive work that you talked about. And we have a few to look at. So Sarah, can you just walk us through and talk about, kind of narrate these slides that we're looking at?
Yeah. So we kind of wanted to show you guys a little bit of what led up to Mind Body in a way. Basically marrying a few ideas, abstract form and figure, which ends up kind of reflecting or equating to mind body. So I really have a great love for figure, which you can see my Matisse, Henri Matisse right here. But definitely was inspired by modern art in the time I was making more figurative work. but breaking that down into a more elemental way, and in a way where you can really appreciate the curve and contour lines, and the interpretation there with things like the piece on the left side of the frame, the figure. I was also really interested in how small sculptures could integrate into a home space. My home space is really important to me, and having objects that feel kind of sanctified and bring in some spirit and energy is definitely a part of how I like to live in my space and how I wanted to explore working as well. And then the abstraction on the right, those are photographs of a sculpture, which we'll see a little bit more clearly later. But I was just wanting to show you kind of their, I'm always interested in, sorry about that. I'm always interested in dictating and playing with how I can control or construe the viewer's perception of a piece, especially when it's abstract. I think the more information you can give, the more, as an abstract artist, you can control how the viewer is perceiving your work. And I think photography can play a huge part in that, especially if the, sculpture is an outdoor sculpture, or if it's not going to be on view for a long time, or whatever that might be. Then, it's up to photography to capture that work if it's not, a 2D painting or something like that. So for me, experience is a huge part of work, and we'll see, I think, the right sculpture self-portrait later on. This one, sorry, this one here is Calm Object, and this is one of my favorite sculptures, and really when I was warming up to subtractive work. And when I made this piece, I felt like I wanted to make like 50 more in the same vein of work. And this is a piece, all of these pieces are pieces I made while an undergraduate, except for Mind Body. So I had the beautiful advantage of working in a shop, with exhaust vents and all the tools that I could want and all the safety gear I would need, as well as amazing teachers and advisors. DJ Argyle was a teacher when I made this, and she definitely encouraged me on my journey through abstraction in sculpture. So form is something that I love. I am a very expressive and nuanced expressive person, and I'm also a very tactile person. So it was important to me that the sculpture invited you in, to want to touch it and almost pet it and be there with it. It feels, it looks abstract, but it also feels really familiar. I feel like it looks like the ground we walk on. It looks like the pits we find holes of rocks in, or the beach side, or the creek side. It felt like something that people could approach still, even though it was abstract, and kind of explore and rub their hands across it. And I remember inviting my fellow students in to do it, and some were really into it and some were more concerned, I think. But this is a really important piece, and definitely inspired the way that I work continually through abstraction and sculpture, and the way that I think about work.
Did this piece come before these?
It came between those, actually.
Okay. So on the left, is that your first sculpture?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, that's something to mention too about Sarah is it correct that you only have had one sculpture class?
One sculpture class, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I found it my last year of my undergraduate, I guess it was my last full year. And then I had one semester, and then I had my student teaching semester. And I was like, where has this been all my life? This is it. So, Sculpture Walk is great in that way, because it allowed me to continue to explore that medium, and hopefully will allow me to continue to explore that medium outside of what school offered, whether it be challenges, or they sponsor you, so they give you some budget money for your work. But also I feel like Sculpture Walk of Springfield invites a lot of collaborators in. It holds a lot of leaders within the community on the board and on the sponsor committee. And so I think it invites you to grab your resources, and ask people, how do I do this if you haven't learned it yet? Or, help me find a facility to work, or whatever it is. If you have the means, and the ambition to do it, I'm sure that you can find someone to help you. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Thank you, Sarah.
So this is self-portrait, which was a really fun sculpture I made in drawing 3 class, which is hilarious because it was drawing in its conception, but isn't at this point. There are a lot of use of lines, but not a lot of clear communication on what this is. If you look at the pieces of wood in that top left picture, and you imagine a face laying on the ground looking upward, you can start to see a profile. So basically, I think actually everyone in the class took several self-portrait or selfies of them in different directions, and they were supposed to abstract those. So I took those selfies and then I made contour lines of my face and kind of elongated those, and then put those into plans to create these boards. Um, and carved those boards and then placed them on a mirror and then installed them outside in a space that's near my home that I really love. This, it's kind of like a big man-made mountain, and when you get on the top you can look at Springfield and see the whole skyline. It's really gorgeous, but it's a space that's so fun to be on, well, to be on and to be in and on, and particularly in Springfield because it feels kind of like New Mexico or something. There's a lot of red clay dirt, and then there's a lot of, like, you can see like ground material and like kind of trash in one space. There's lots of holes and divots. It almost feels like you're on a different planet, which adds to this like ambiance that's being created in these images, where you kind of get this weird eerie feeling with the sunrise, that helps to dictate the way the sculpture feels, a little bit almost like not of this earth in a way, which is interesting, because the mirror is reflecting the sky and the wood is so apparently from earth. But yeah, I mean, when I was creating this work, I was really thinking about who I am, and what if I were to draw or tell someone about who I was, like, what would I say? It's a self-portrait. And I personally feel a huge connection to the earth and the world. And I wanted that to be apparent in how I created the self-portrait. And so I chose to literally reflect it in the mirror and then place it in earth. So that's that piece.
I'm drawing so many connections to pieces we're going to talk about soon with the use of the mirror and earth. I think this is a wonderful example of how you pull together so many different skill sets. So your work as a photographer, your understanding of space, your understanding of concept and meaning making in artwork, especially with this piece, because to me, the photographs and even the collaging of the photographs are so beautiful. And I really don't think I would have the same reaction with the sculpture alone, especially if it was installed in a white wall gallery with a pedestal. But yeah, these images are so wonderful. And the fact that it can be both, and it can be both sculpture, it can be both photograph, or it becomes its own artwork.
So this is a piece I made outside of school. It was the semester I graduated, and the first commissioned artwork I had ever made for Phoenix, a sculpture garden in Phoenix, Arizona, which we'll see on a following slide. It's called Holy Reservoir, and I made this in the same vein, the same spirit of celebrating Earth, of being with Earth and having this kind of sanctified, holy experience with how we interact with the Earth. And particularly this going into a sculpture garden, I wanted it to be kind of a celebration and a way to capture viewers' attention with to what was going on in the world, whether it was raining or really dry, which was important in this environment in Phoenix, Arizona, because they have dry droughts, seasons of drought, and then they have like monsoon seasons. They have tons of rain. So I thought that would be an interesting way to see the sculpture kind of transform out in a garden. And I love outdoor sculpture because you do see it with the seasons. You see it, in winter and summer, spring, fall, depending upon where you are, those seasons, um, materialize themselves in different ways. But specifically with the drought and the rain, I thought it'd be very interesting to draw attention to collection.
Yeah, and it's not just collecting in the wood bowl shape, it's also collecting into the concrete with the way that the water changes its color.
And like Shauna said, about the earthly experience of these works, let's see, I totally lost my train of thought when I was mentioning these. Something came across my brain. Oh, the photography. Photography being such an important part of my process, especially when being able to communicate it and, do things such as this where we're looking back on it. Um, this day specifically, when I photographed my sculpture, I tend to have like, I'm a romantic person generally, and not with other human beings, but mostly with the world. On a rainy day, I could go out and just be soaked by the rain. I want to feel it all. And I think that that's part of how and why I create work and what the motivations are behind it is kind of being able to share that experience that feels so wonderfully overwhelming when you get to just bathe yourself in the world. And this day in particularly, I was sending out the sculpture the following day and we had like a huge rainstorm. And oh my God, I was like so excited. I was like running out. I had my camera. I have this outside of my barn. I'm taking pictures. I'm soaked from head to toe. And like I have my film camera. So it's kind of hard to take photographs when it's raining on your film camera. But definitely embracing that whole experience. And I feel like when I have that experience, it's almost like this third wave um, moment with these materials. The drawing phase is like one experience with what you're doing, the sculpting and then execution phase, it's finished, and then this last experience where you're putting it out into the world, and me myself as an artist taking photographs of it get to have that like very private, kind of sanctified, I use that word a lot, but this experience with it that feels really powerful, really magical, and really beautiful. And I think that as an artist, um, it's it's an experience that probably all artists, I would say, experience at some level when they finally finish that artwork and it's hanging on the wall and out in the world. Um, it's a very I don't know what the right word, Shauna. Do you know what the right word would be? Like it's almost like it's beyond yourself in a way because you know that the work came from a space that sometimes you can't even communicate fully. So to have that an idea plus a form to encompass this concept that feels so inside of you outward feels like this really wonderful celebration of an object, of yourself, and of the world in my case, because that's usually what I involve in my work. So I definitely feel like photography and the experience with the photography is a huge part of the last few sculptures that we've seen.
Well, that's so inspiring because I think for a lot of artists, including myself, the photography of a piece feels so external. Like it's almost like the homework you have to do. And
Yeah.
often you forget, like I've done that. I've had whole exhibitions where I forget to photograph it. And to hear you talk about your experience of photographing these sculptures as being this kind of moment where you get to celebrate its being and you being with it and being in nature in the same way that it's in nature together. That's amazing to me. And I think that's a part of what makes your photograph so successful is because it is something that is real to you. It's like something you're passionate about. It's a real experience, which doesn't always come across in somebody's photograph of their own artwork.
Totally. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
So this piece is, I just want to share a small introduction to it because um, I think it's a beautiful marriage of a lot of the different things that Sarah does, which she'll share with us. And it's also going to be able to take us into sort of a next phase of our conversation, which is talking about Sarah's florist work. So can you talk to us about growth?
Yeah. So, Growth is a piece I made in the summer of 2019. I believe this was after the Sculpture Wreck Mind Body piece, to give some context there on timeline. This was a collaborative piece with my husband. He made the metal frame and we kind of sketched that and thought about that together and we hammered it out. It's a reclaimed material. And then all of the live materials upon its surface were foraged. The dirt was brought in from our land, and then the mirror we found in our barn and reinstated it here. In the last image, you can see one way of viewing it, which is with video atop the surface. This was installed at Q&O Tech on Commercial Street for a show that they did under Untitled SGF. And so we had the opportunity to really transform a space. We showed with one other artist, Andy Corbett. He's an incredible painter here in town and ceramic artist. But we got to use video. We suspended the piece from the top of the ceiling. And then I arranged and installed all of the live materials on site and foraged those materials the day before and the morning of. So I think that, and Shauna mentioning the floristry work, and that starts to bring in, that aspect, not only the live material, but also the part of the process that's very time sensitive, and the part of the process that happens the day of or the day before or on site. This piece is definitely reflective of the season, reflective of my personal season as a human being, and also reflective of this exploratory phase I was in, not only with my artwork, but also with my life, coming out of school. And, you usually think, well, this is my degree, so I guess that's what I'm going to do. But that's definitely not the case. Warning. You end up kind of figuring out your own way. And of course, that should seem obvious. And maybe somebody should have told me that, or I should have figured that out before figuring it out through experience. But it's interesting in that way. And I think that a lot of this work was reflecting upon what I was experiencing at the time. The video was moving images of a lot of native plants on walks. And a lot like my photographs, it was captured in a more abstract way, really blurry, kind of grainy, a lot of moving images, and then a lot of still or flashing images. And there was no sound. Well, I think there was a little bit of sound, but you couldn't really hear it in the installation. It was very subtle, and just kind of those like slow motion walk sounds that end up kind of being eerie, which add to this viewing experience, especially with the mirror underneath the piece, which also allows the perspective to be a little bit widened because you start to see the sculpture from a different angle. You see flowers hanging upside down. It starts to remind you, when you have the lights off, it starts to remind you of how it looks when you're looking into a water reflection or a pond at night. But yeah, there with growth, again, growth and reflection, self-reflection, it all kind of came together in this piece again for this installation.
At this point of your life, were you already making floral arrangements?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
So I started making floral arrangements actually in 2015, off and on, for friends and family. My good friend Alex Crowder, she's a florist in New York, taught me how to arrange actually over text phone in 2015, when she entrusted me with giving her mother an arrangement for Mother's Day. And then her birthday, and then her next birthday, and then the next other day. So I started to kind of be this surrogate daughter, florist daughter for Alex's mom while I was in art school. And it was a really beautiful way too for me to escape some of those like rigid expectations I had in my work at school, in the photography department or in other ways. There was just when you're in, when you're in a degree field, you seem more, boxed in by what the expectations are. So having another medium that was kind of being integrated into my life was really exciting for me. And she is a foraging florist as well. And a lot of the way I think about my practice is kind of like heirloom from her passed down. So she's really passionate about sustainability and practicing her craft in a way that's very responsible for the earth, and also discovering native flowers. And she spoke a lot of that into my life, bought me my first native wildflower book and things like that. So I started kind of doing a little bit of this and that here and there. By this time I had done a friend's wedding, and I think oh, and then assisted. No, I guess that's all I had done. So we're just a dinner party at my house for friends, a wedding, and then one-off arrangements for friends and family.
Whenever you were making this one, were you thinking about it as a floral arrangement? Were you thinking about it as an art object, or just both at once?
I think I was thinking about it more as an art object, but also very integrated. I had never used flowers in a weaving way before this piece. Um, so that's definitely the way that you apply flowers on this curvy plane is so different from an arrangement piece. But the composition is still the same in some senses, like you still follow the same laws of composition, but that also parallels across like most art mediums. Just generally principles and elements of design apply in most things you're making, so balance and harmony. And so I was thinking about like you can see the balance definitely, and between the colors they kind of integrate on both sides. So I was thoughtfully arranging this onto the surface, but not necessarily in the way that I was thinking about, like how I think about floral arrangements when I'm arranging them. And this was really before I started seriously self-teaching into the craft and the practice of floristry.
Right. I know I'm getting stuck here, but one last thing is that another big part of this piece for me was the surprise, because as you can see, the guests were allowed to walk all the way around this work. They were able to see it in the brightness and in the dimness with the video on later that evening. And there were just these pockets of surprise texture and floral pieces, like the certain ways, if you look at the left-hand side, you have those pieces kind of hanging down from a part of it that's almost enclosed. And some of your other work with the abstract forms, you kind of look at it once and you understand, you can see what it is as an object. But if we go back to this piece, self-portrait, that surprise element comes back in, not just that the fact that it's the mirror, so all of a sudden you're going to look at it and see your own reflection, which was a part of viewing growth, but also where you installed it to take these photographs, which was on that like man-made mountain. And I think that element of surprise plays into the way that you arrange florals because of the material you use, the textures that you use, and your forms, the compositions that you create, kind of the dramatics and things like that happen in them.
Yeah, thank you for drawing attention to that. Shauna, did you want to say something? Okay, well, I just wanted to brief over this really quick because it made sense in the bridge between using video and seeing video here again. I made this short film this past summer or spring in 2020 with Harrison Palmer. He filmed it, and I wrote the film and directed it, stylized it, and it also incorporated my floristry work. So it was kind of before my business now, Locust, launched, but also in efforts of me trying to find whatever means I could find to express a creative vision. And I think that as an artist, that's something that I try to encourage other artists to explore, because I think Shauna mentions has mentioned before, photography, and all these skill sets, design. I think a lot of it is just understanding those principles and elements of design and having a vision for your artwork, and then being able to execute that through either having maybe even only the vision. Like, that's why directorial work and artist direction work is so interesting, because you work with other really talented people to bring your vision to life, which is something here that Mother definitely explored, was having this beautiful set, cast, and crew for this, but also an incredibly talented filmographer to document this, and to work alongside other creative individuals on a collaborative piece is such a joy.
So where can people see this video?
So it's on my website. If you go to locustfloral.com, I believe it's about, and then when you scroll through about, you'll learn a little bit about my work, also the other services I offer, like my creative services, and then you'll see the Mother video. It's also on YouTube, and that's under Harrison Palmer's account. And then I've shared it on social media before under IGTV, and I believe Harrison has as well. This was a collaboration with Prairie Pie, another business owner. We did a pop-up for Mother's Day last year. And so this was kind of more, I used that more of an excuse to create a film. But this was definitely in support of her product as well. So in the video, we're making pie and we eat it in the end. And I believe she shared it on her social platforms as well.
Yeah, it's a beautiful video, so please do watch it. It's not very long, it's just a few minutes. You also get to see the most beautiful baby in it. Our friend Elder stars in it, and Barrett. Um, Before we jump into talking more about Locust, I have another question about your ability to just do so many different things. So you were talking about here, whenever you're talking about Mother, you mentioned just kind of having an artistic vision and finding a way to get there. And you obviously are great at collaborating as well. So you don't just, it's not you on one island and you want to try to figure everything out. You're so wonderful as a collaborator. And a part of that is your focus on being so community driven. But how do you get from that point of like, okay, I have this idea of something I've never done before. I've never, just as an excuse or as an example, I've never directed a video before, or I've never started my own business before is another great example. How do you jump from that and then finding your way of doing it and not getting stuck in just the fear of it all?
Yeah, I think, fear is a real beast. And I think that there's a certain, I think there's actually a certain like threshold you have to break through once. And once you learn, and I think honestly for me, that experience was learning how to be an artist. And I grew up, I didn't take an art class until after I graduated high school. I actually, which makes film a little bit more familiar to me. I went to Hillcrest High School on the north side of town. We had a great broadcast journalism program. So I did a lot of journalistic work and a lot of anchoring and a lot of storytelling and writing. And so I think that maybe my background was a little bit more in that, as far as that goes, rather than, so like creative vision and having a concept and figuring out how to carry that through in a collaborative way, in a production way, and then getting that through to an end product. But then I first went to nursing school, then I went to OTC, where I took my first drawing class and loved it. And that's when I started discovering the entire creative world and the entire art world. And when I found out that was it, I began on my journey, which I'm sure even at that point, it took a lot of breaking down fear barriers and a lot of self-doubt and dealing with that. And I think as far as self-doubt and fear, I think it's more about finding your community, and a community that supports you and believes in you, because when you have that creative ambition, people know it's there and they'll support you and help you feed it. And I had an incredible professor, Steve Willis at MSU, that really, like, he encouraged us so much, especially for me, who felt so isolated in some ways because the art world was so unfamiliar to me. I was sketching for the first time in college, and so having a leader that believes in you and believes in your capacity and encourages you and pushes you, and then finding your community is a huge part of getting that at least seed to start to plant that seed. And then I think as far as pursuing continuing to pursue new endeavors, there's a little bit of that breaking the ice that happens when you do it once. And then when you learn something new, you realize that it's just a lot of research, a lot of time and hard work in order to figure out if it's going to work or not. And I think there's sometimes where it just doesn't work because you didn't like it, or there's such a myriad of things that you could put blame to that. I never really loved drawing as a final form, but I found a lot of expression and a lot of ability to strengthen my process in making what I wanted to make with sculpture, with design, or with floristry when I was able to improve my skills in that. So I think you do learn what languages you favor. I mentioned sculpture, I didn't find till later, and it kind of felt like I finally found my artistic language with sculpture. So, I mean, more than anything, try everything, because you might be stuck in a medium that is almost your language. It's like your second language and you haven't found your first language yet. And if you don't keep exploring, you don't figure out what that is. I think also by 2020, I had done a lot of traveling and looked at a lot of art. And I got the opportunity to see a show called Spring Break in New York City. It was on like the top floor of a hotel, and it was all contemporary art, all mixed media. You couldn't go into each room without saying, like, you couldn't just go into a room and be like, this is painting, and this is drawing, and this is video. It was just everything. It was whatever the artist needed to communicate. It was each of those languages in order to communicate that one thing that they needed. And that to me was like, oh, okay, so like you have an idea and you use all of the things you need to in order to get there, and sometimes using many things makes that a more interesting experience for the viewer, and you're more likely to capture the viewer in that way because you're dealing with all of their senses. So installation, specifically with growth, was where I started to get to play with that idea more. And installation still really interests me, because I do feel like it's the opportunity the artist gets to pull the viewer in with many different reels.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that you mentioned several different times is this idea of using whatever material you need to get the message across that you're wanting to get across. And you've said that for yourself, and you just mentioned it for the artists that you've seen in the Spring Break exhibition. And that's something I identify with as an artist and as a sculptor. And a part of that too is about adaptability, your ability to adapt to, not getting stuck in that second language or that first language, and being willing to find more. And the other thing I hear from you is this responding to yourself. So responding to your desires that you feel. What is it that you and your artistic practice and your projects actually need? And if that means working with a brand new material or process or brand new collaborators, that's what you got to do to like continue the expansion that is your practice and yourself. So speaking of adaptability, speaking of expansion, we are going to start talking to Sarah about her newest endeavor. In 2020, she embarked on starting her own business, which, as she mentioned, is titled Locust. So Sarah, can you talk to us about what Locust is and what it is that you do?
Yes. So Locust is my florist business. My services mainly comprise event services. So I really try to focus on weddings, events, and pop ups and things like that, where I'm collaborating either with a client to create flowers for their ceremony or a special day or a dinner, or collaborating with other business owners to kind of help bring a full vision to life. And usually that involves flowers in some way. Flowers often are incorporated in hospitality events and experiences around food and beverage, as well as those mile marking events such as weddings or graduations or things like that. So as I get my business off the ground, my services do also take on, like a myriad of forms, from corporate clients to like delivering. I have arrangements at the Coffee Ethic that reflect the seasons. I also have arrangements at Transformation Gallery, and I also do one off deliveries. If someone's having a birthday, they can place a special order, but really focus on those concept driven large scale events, which is also where I feel like my work can really shine, because I get to take hold of a whole space and think through a design concept a little bit more than perhaps just one arrangement. And so that's really what I love to do, is to be able to take, for instance, this is Alyssa and Marcus's wedding in St. Louis. We have I have a few stages of consultation in my design process for bridal clients, and really for any client, whether I'm working with a brand or a bride and groom. Um, but I ask them a lot about, what their likes and dislikes are, what their interests are, if they have any experiences or stories they want to tell me, if they have any art that they really love. And I use that information to inform the concept for the flowers moving forward. We can, I often use film or color theory, art bodies of work. I think for specifically Marcus and Alyssa, they definitely were drawing inspiration from Helen Frankenthaler's paintings that were like cobalt blue and red with some yellows. And so that's really where their color palette began. And they had a lot of beautiful images on a beach, which worked so well with Klondike Park, which is in St. Louis, or right outside of St. Louis. It's a gorgeous space. Um, so yeah, I think that specifically with Locust, it's definitely concept forward. I want to have a story before I create work, or at least an ambition for where I want to take something. Specifically with this piece, what inspired me to make these works were the green bean vine in my grandmother's garden, which she allowed me to cut instead of her harvesting for her canned beans. Thank you, Granny. And the lily from her garden, and the rest is foraged. And I find it to be an absolute joy to work with forage material or fresh garden material. I worked at Millsap Farms for a growing season this last year. And there's something really beautiful that fresh material brings to an arrangement that shipped material from a wholesaler just can't bring. And that comes, like, with that comes several things, one about like familiarity and a sense of place, which I think a viewer can have an experience with. A lot of people are used to seeing wild sunflowers and black-eyed Susans and sea oats and Johnson grass, and a lot of people will almost be, I think a lot of people look at this work and sometimes overlook the green bean vine, and when they look closer, that's kind of a weird ingredient. But the irony in that is that it's also so Ozark, it's so native to where we are, and, our ancestry and what our parents grew up doing and things like that. A lot of rural kids remember breaking beans and like hating it. So it's fun to use materials that relate to our personal experiences and our nostalgia. And I find a lot of excitement in that when I arrange.
Yeah, so you talked about foraging, and so for those who don't know exactly what that means, can you talk to us about what does it mean to forage material?
So foraging or wild crafting or wild harvesting, it's basically going out into the world and cutting material, which I don't recommend just anyone to do, because there are a lot of species that is harmful to cut because they help pollinate, or they're good for the butterfly population or certain endangered species. But there are certain things that are sometimes like way overgrown, which is really terrific. And like if you are in Missouri, you know that honeysuckle is overgrown and would not be harmful for you to cut. Or specifically this locust branch, it's honey locust here on the top and bottom of this arrangement. And a lot of farmers actually see it as a harmful tree and they pull it out of their field. It's oftentimes thorny, and they grow pretty fast, so they can be intrusive. And so there are certain things here that are more abundant that you can cut if you're foraging or wild harvesting. And really, you can look that up on the conservation website. Um, but a good rule of thumb is not to take more than a third of whatever you see. And if there's not a lot of it, don't bother in taking it because somebody else might need it.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so this piece was for both foraged and sourced from Millsap Farms north of town. All the blooms were sourced from Millsap Farms except the small black-eyed Susans. And then the branch is honey locust from my front yard. And then the oats there, they have several names, river oats, sea oats. But they're such a special ingredient. And I actually harvested those from one of my best friend's mom's gardens. So you can, sometimes I sometimes like getting permission from people's landscaping more than I do from natural habitats, just in case there is something there that could use it more than I could. But if I am going to use it, I try to be educated about it, especially if I'm taking more than what I feel like is permissioned from me. So um, this piece is fennel, fresh fennel and apple for Prairie Pie. They had a pot pie pop up, and they're actually opening their storefront this month over on Jefferson Street. And so those apples are sourced, the apple branches are sourced from Millsap Farms, and the apples on the ground were sourced from Sunshine Valley Farms, and the fennel is from a big overgrown fresh fennel patch at Millsap Farm. And so that's wild fennel there in the corner. It smells so good. So that's another part of that installation, and using live material is that sensory experience you get to have, which is something that you don't usually get, in a gallery or with sculpture that's made out of wood or stone.
Right. Is there any other, there's many, but is there any other major differences or similarities between your art making where you're more object focused versus your floral work?
Yeah, definitely. Um, I think that primarily it's a lot about time and like the ephemeral quality of florals and live materials, um, which is both exhilarating and also disheartening and challenging. But I think most of all, it's actually pretty forgiving and encouraging because it's naturally just making you make more. It's over now. You kind of have to move past it and make something else in order for anything to exist in that space again. You do have photography, of course, and documentation, but it's nothing that you can take home or really reinstall anywhere else. Um, Something that's interesting, especially about installations like this, is that it really only looks good for about 3 days max, and that's depending upon the sun shining on it, or how much water was able to get to certain things. For shallow arrangements such as the wild fennel floor piece there, you have to use really shallow vessels so that they kind of disappear into the ground, so that it looks like it's growing up from the ground, which can't hold a lot of water. And when you're making that for a business client, you're not paying them to water your flowers every day either. So, there's a lot of challenge that comes with making something fresh like that. But it's super exhilarating. And I think that that's part of my love for like the photography portion of sculptures in the same way, because I usually am working with light, or I'm working with like an external environmental factor, like it's pouring now and I have to take this picture when it's pouring because the sculpture is meant to hold water, or it's sunrise and the sunrise is only going to last for 20 minutes, and on each 5 minutes the color in the sky is changing, so I have to capture each gradient that's happening. There's a little bit of that exhilaration through time and process with the material that I really enjoy in art making, as far as sculpture and certain things like this, like flower sculpture. Um, but I think that beyond the ephemeral quality, that's the main obvious difference. I think that something that's really interesting is you're using inherent shapes already. So it's more like collaging in that way, where you're finding certain shapes that you want, that will make whatever vision you have come to life or make your arrangement successful. Um, so that's a huge part of floristry that is different but also overlaps to art making in some ways. Um, there's definitely no really altering the material that much. There are florists, incredible florists that do paint on large leaves and flowers, like Sophie Parker, who's actually from the Ozarks, living and working in New York under wife. She paints a lot on large, like houseplant um, shapes and things like that. So there are ways that you can alter your material, but you're still really limited to how you alter them in whatever the plant already is. So that's a big difference. Um, but I think more so it comes in, how do I sculpt this to keep it alive as long as I can, and then working with the environmental factors that come with that, such as light, because light can kill live plants pretty quickly. And then the water that's available and the inherent lifespan of the plant, which usually is no longer than 7 days once cut from the earth.
I think this notion, the ephemeral aspect of florals and earth, well, I guess we can't say on earth materials, but cut earth materials, that fleeting beauty that you offer viewers. So this was on view. You said it may have been longer, but you said that in some cases, some things only live for about 3 days. And I love your connection to how you've that fleeting beauty feels familiar to you also because of your photography background, because you know exactly this, like right when the sun is hitting the earth just perfectly is when you need to take that photograph. But I'm also interested in, so if we jump back to Mind Body, which again is the sculpture that you made for Sculpture Walk Springfield, which has now been installed for over a year. It is a semi-permanent art piece and it's made out of materials that are quite permanent.
Mhm.
Can you just talk to us a little bit about, do you favor one? Do you favor the permanence versus the impermanence, or do you just have feelings about both of those? I know you talked about the ephemeral aspect a little bit, but in juxtaposition to Mind Body as an example.
Yeah. I think yeah, I definitely have feelings about both of them. Something that's really, and not that photography can't allow things to live longer, so you can, continue to reinterpret them. Something about like a semi-permanent sculpture, though, is that it does take on time, better. So whether that involves a reinterpretation or more people that are able to view it or have an experience with it, or the witnessing of wear and how it weathers through time, and whether it's indoor or outside. I think there's a lot about time that is experienced by society around it that's really interesting in aiding the interpretation of the thing, because really that context, especially in like community public work, is really relevant. A lot of the sculptures are reflecting, in Sculpture Walk of Springfield, are reflecting the community members within it and the culture that's inherent within the community. So I think that takes on a certain meaning that can like wear time a little bit better. Um, but also because it's lasting, I think that as soon as I finished Mind Body, I wanted to do it again in a way. There were things that I wanted to do differently, or different materials I would have access to now that I didn't then. And I'm less inspired to do so because like it's still standing there strong and tall, versus something like this where I could do it again and I would be inspired to do it again and it would be really different. And something also that's interesting about this sort of thing is there's no way it could be quite exactly the same thing again. And there's definitely not a way it could be the same thing if I'm not in the exact season and time that I took the materials from the earth at this time.
Yeah, it's so about process instead of, it is about end result, but even the end result alone is still a process, as you know it's going to change over the days that it's installed.
Yeah.
So this is the inside of the window. Should we look at the next thing, or do you want to mention
Yeah.
them?
We can, just so we don't run out of time. This is another installation I did for Prairie Pie for a little pop-up event. They had a little restaurant alleyway dining experience. And so I installed this very spring-looking installation. I'm using honey locust again a little bit later in its life. So it starts to have brown on the locust bean, which locust tree, I guess I'll just expand on that a little bit because my name is Locust as a business. Something that I felt was really important for Locust, naming my flower business was naming it after something that kind of showed both the dark and the light side of the environment and the earth. And locust can be super invasive, and farmers hate it, and they usually rip it up. It's thorny. A lot of people don't really care about how it looks, but they have these beautiful long beans. And there's different types of locust. There's black locust, which is a native Missouri, kind of an Ozark proud tree. We can use the wood for a lot of things. But there's honey locust. There's purple robe locust, which make these beautiful, like puffy, like chandelier like blooms. But all of those are very invasive trees. And so a lot of times people are pulling them out of their yards. And I think that's really interesting generally. The idea of having like an invasive species and basically inviting the human hand to interrupt what's happening naturally, when a lot of these species, came to North America because of the human hand. But it just kind of, for me, I mean, no one would ever unless they were investigating this, would they know a little bit about why I named my business Locust. But for me, that man and human kind experience with earth was something that was important to reflect in my name and what I do, but also using something that's kind of ugly. Or on the other hand, there's locust, the insect, which a lot of people also have really negative connotations with. And so having something that was both kind of dark and light was really important to reflecting my floristry business and the way that I wanted to.
Oh, that's good to hear. I never thought about asking you why you name it. So thanks for sharing that
Yeah.
story. With this install, I think that surprise elements comes back because this is on a alleyway that prior to what Prairie Pie put on and Locust, it was like almost invisible. Nobody thought about this aisle. It was just an alleyway. This gate, nothing's ever happened on that gate. And then one day you all popped up and you were selling pies, you were selling arrangements. So in this case, like for this installation or the one inside Prairie Pie or any sort of public installation that you do with floral work, what is it that I'll add to that. When you give somebody an arrangement or a bouquet, what is it that you're hoping your viewers or your receivers of your floral work will experience with them?
Well, it's funny that you mention element of surprise because that's something I wrote in my notes when you prepared these questions for me. Um, I think that's such a fun experience as the florist to the, receiver or the recipient of the bouquet, is that element of surprise. I think that no one really ever expects to receive flowers, which is so interesting because that's kind of just part of it. But no one really expects to receive them. And then on top of that, to give something that is interesting, that is using weird material, or something that you may have seen on the side of the road, or something that like like some sweet Annie that your grandma always had in her backyard and you've never seen it since you were a kid. Like there's all of these really interesting material choices that I can make as a florist that makes that surprise, that element of surprise, and that joy in the receiving so exciting. But I really love seeing the expression on the recipient's face when they're given flowers, or if it's a larger scale project like an installation, like the owner sees it and comes out and is just like, awe and like, what is this? Like, it's a world, you know, in a way. So when you get to be in it and consumed by it, or you really love the thing and it's reflecting you, as like the owner or whoever I'm collaborating with to make the piece, if it's a bride or groom, I feel like sometimes people are really surprised again, but kind of awe-inspired by the way that flowers can feel like you, where you can take certain things like colors and shapes and inspiration and put it into a piece, a commissioned piece, and really reflect what that client wants. And that's really exciting too when the client is pleased in that way.
Yes, it's all about love, that feeling of receiving surprise flowers. But and I love that you talk about them getting to see themselves reflected in it. And at the same time, you also mentioned, you quote, like, it's a world, like you see this installation and it's a whole world. It's a world that's like made up of our own earth too. So it's like familiar,
Mhm.
but it's brand
Yeah.
new. And yeah. So we have a couple more images to look at. We are definitely, I'm taking more of Sarah's time than agreed upon. So if Sarah, if you'd like, we can talk about these last few images and then I can ask you one last question and you can share anything else you'd like to. We can wrap up. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, yeah, we'll brief through these quickly. This is Alyssa and Marcus's ceremony. We saw an image from their ceremony before. I just wanted to show these pieces really quickly because you start to understand how sculpture plays into floristry work, really in larger scale pieces, especially these ones and particularly where you really see a base shape and you see a lot of those principles and elements of design in these works. They really do look like little sculptures in a way. So I just wanted to brief through these, but these are two sculptural altarpieces for Alyssa and Marcus's ceremony. And it's interesting about floristry because we were talking about comparing and contrasting previously. Material choice is such a huge part of making a successful arrangement, not only from the variety of shapes that you need in order to have that balance and interest, but also factors such as like scale, like the larger hydrangeas on the bottom there and the top were really imperative to have full flowery moments on a large scale piece. Um, the eucalyptus by itself is a really hardy plant. So being able to put this into the sculptural altarpiece without putting it into water is a huge perk for a florist, because you know it's going to last a few hours looking really good. Certain vines and things like that also are a lot hardier, so you don't have to put them in water right away. So if you're making something that's installed like this that needs to be alive for 1 or 2 hours, that's definitely part of limitations, challenges, and also exciting aspects to being a florist. Um, Also, I like made these pieces in between it raining, so you have all these environmental factors. I couldn't make this in the rain, but I had to have everything out there. There's a really long driveway, so you have to park your truck way far back. So there's all of these like environmental factors that are challenges, but that really make the process exciting. I think that what makes me most addicted to being an artist is needing to constantly problem solve. I think that's something that is kind of a, um, I don't know, it just adds some like exhilarating feelings. And then you get to this end product where you know you've gone through so many challenges to get to this piece. Um, that part is really exciting for me. And that's why I like this like spontaneous building essentially is what this like floristry process is kind of like. Um, a lot of this is a mix between foraged and purchased flowers. That's one thing that's different about large scale weddings or planning months and months ahead. It's sometimes challenging to source the majority of your product from local farmers, especially towards, for instance, this where it's the end of the season. Usually farmers can't guarantee product until like 2 weeks ahead and they're like, okay, I think I'm gonna have like 10 calendula, but I really don't know. So you have to kind of, if you care about sourcing locally, which I do, you have to really play a lot by ear and be really forgiving with your ideas, let a lot of control up, but also trust yourself that you're going to be able to come up with something that makes a lot of sense visually when you get to what you have at the end. So that kind of is just kind of talking you through a few of these things. We could probably move on to the next slide. Cool. These are some really simple modern ikebana pieces. Ikebana is a Japanese tradition of arranging flowers, and contemporary florists have kind of take their modern twist on it. Ikebana is like definitely a science. There's a lot about balance and composition and composure with ikebana. So these are not like, these are modern ikebana, you know, much more less methodical in a sense. There's still those same like points of composition that traditional ikebana has, but they really focus on like degrees and angles and things when they're arranging. These were really fun pieces for me. This was a concept I fleshed out about a month before, or a couple months before the wedding. I collected a lot of these rocks and then also got a lot of these rocks from my father-in-law's rock collection. And a lot of those rocks are like fossilized, so they have holes in them, which vary in depth and size and how many are in each rock. So again, another challenge and another kind of spontaneous building challenge where with each vessel, I had a different type of rock with different holes that may or may not hold water, that may not go all the way through to the bowl so that it can get the water. I might have to sandwich some rocks together in order to hold stems up. So it's a lot of experimenting, problem solving, trial and error, and a lot of working with the material that you have and letting it have its own voice as well. Because I didn't, you know, drill holes in these rocks or change them or manipulate them in any way. I just worked with what they were allowing me to do, which I really love that part of the process of really being more in collaboration with Earth than being in control of it.
Well, thank you for sharing everything that you have. I'm refraining from all of the other questions I want to ask and that are popping up. Luckily, I can do that when I call you right after this film part or something. But Sarah, thank you so much. This variety of work you showed, it's amazing. So I have that one last question for you, which is, where is it that you see your floral work and your art making going in the future?
Yeah. So something that Shauna knows very well about me is my ability to embrace the unknown. There's a lot that I feel like I can plan and a lot that I feel like I can't plan in order for the best plan to take hold, essentially. I think I've learned through life experiences that sometimes it's really good to leave some space to explore. But in particularly, I'll be going to upstate New York, May, June, and July for an apprenticeship and florist residency at Sepua, which is a flower farm in New York State. It's about 30 miles from Albany, the town is. And really, I mean, I think foremost, I'm going to be focusing on a skill that I don't know a lot about, which is farming. I've worked on a flower farm I mentioned before, and previous to that, I worked on a farm in sorts. It was more of a farm urban development where I started a coffee shop. So I've been in that sphere for a while. I've been in the local food scene for a long time, and I have always had a passion for that. But now I'm kind of challenging this new skill set, which I don't necessarily see myself farming in the future, but I understand that that's definitely a dimension to my practice that could inform what I'm doing now further. And so through just my curious spirit and my adventurous spirit as well, I'm going to be going out there. I will be able to make flowers daily using fresh flowers from the farm and forage around the area, which I'm excited to explore the Northeast landscape and see how that compares to the Ozarks. As well as having fresh flowers daily is going to be such a joy. But they also host workshops, so I'll be assisting on different workshops. I don't know which workshops will land while I'm there, but they've done certain workshops like broom making and natural dyeing and basket making and things like that. So a craftsman focused experience while feeding everyone there and working with the other apprentice and the other staff. And focusing on my art practice and kind of fleshing out that question, Shauna, that you asked me is, where do I see this going? And, how can I take all of these things that I love um, and kind of marry them together in a way that feels balanced and harmonious and like me. So
Wonderful. I'm wishing you the best during that trip, and I'm so glad that you're doing that for yourself. Here on the screen, we have a couple different ways to get a hold of Sarah. So if you are interested in talking to her further, um, maybe having her arrange some beautiful floral work for you, go ahead and check out her website and send her an email or shoot her a message on social media if it's a more of a casual thing, because I know Sarah's always open to meeting more people and collaborating and just being in community. So is there anything else you'd like to share, Sarah?
no, that's great, Shauna. Thank you so much. It was such a fun experience to be interviewed by you and look through that work. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I really love Sculpture Walk of Springfield. So I hope that this gets the word out there more, and that we get more people involved and more people looking at sculptures around town.
Thank you for being so generous, Sarah, and I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Shauna.
Thank you.